You are now listening to the Mastering Happiness podcast with Dr. Joel Wade.
Hello, podcast listeners. This is Jordan River, the executive producer of the Mastering Happiness podcast. I want to thank you for tuning in today. So excited to be talking to you here. We also have, of course, the creator of the Mastering Happiness podcast, Dr. Joel Wade, on the line. How you doing, Dr. Joel?
Good, Jordan. Thanks.
You know, for you listeners who have heard some of our older episodes, our interviews together, I'm actually really excited to unveil this new episode type to all you listeners because I just love doing those so much with Joel. And when I'm producing this show, I'll listen to his work and I'll be texting him the entire time. What about this follow-up? You need to do an episode on this. What about that? And eventually, Joel, it was like, I'm texting you this 2 times, 3 times a week. We got to get on the air together and do some duo shows. So thank you for creating such an awesome podcast and creating this little audience, this little tribe you've gathered. And thank you for allowing me to come in and start to provide some content with you too.
Well, thanks, Jordan. It's always fun doing this with you.
Totally. And like I said, these episodes beg more questions when I hear them. So it's great to be able to dig deep on some of this stuff. And it also allows us to do some interesting things when it comes to shedding light on your life and your work, which the audience, frankly, wants to know about, Joel. So this is the perfect first inaugural interview episode because I want to talk to the listeners today about the work that you're doing outside of the podcast. Some really interesting stuff that you've been involved with recently, working with parents and schools, talking about the hazards of over-medicating their children, medicating too early, when it's necessary to medicate, when it's not. I was really fascinated by this stuff. So could you start by giving a little overview of what you were basically brought on to do?
Yeah, well, there's been kind of a trend in the last several decades of treating kids with psychoactive medication who they might be hyperactive, attention deficit disorder, or they might be depressed, they might be anxious, and it's been more and more condoned to deal with these things with these very powerful psychotropic medications. And I don't have any problem with medications themselves. Medications can be a godsend if they're the right thing for the right person at the right time. My problem is with treating very young children with these powerful psychotropic medications while their brains are developing. And with anything like this, there's always a trade-off. And I can't say for sure that there's never a place for this for a younger child, but I can say that it's pretty common that people aren't really taking the trade-offs as seriously as they're warranted, because what often happens is there'll be a child that's having a hard time, and maybe they're depressed, maybe they're anxious, maybe they're having a hard time sitting still or concentrating, and it seems like it would be great for them just to be put on these medications that would solve that. The problem is, it doesn't work that simply. It doesn't just solve it. There are some situations where with maybe a teenager or something, if they really can't focus, and I've known people that on Ritalin, they can focus, or on Adderall, they can focus. And it's like night and day, and it really makes a difference for them, and the trade-offs are worth it. But I think too often these things are given to kids when the trade-offs really aren't appreciated, especially when it's very young kids. Now, on the label of Ritalin itself, you'll see that it says, do not give to children under 6 years old, because it hasn't been determined that it's helpful or safe. Something to that effect. I don't have the exact wordings in front of me. But there's research showing that it's more common for people to be given these medications at 3 and 4 years old.
Wow.
And so that there's research looking at the effects of it at 3 and 4 years old means people are giving it to kids long before it's been approved to be given.
So you're arguing for what's for on the label.
Yeah, yeah. So that's one piece of it. Another piece is while kids are developing, so much is happening in our brains when we're growing up, when we're little and growing up and learning and figuring out the world, and not just figuring out the world, but figuring out our own internal world,
Mm-hmm.
our emotions, our thoughts, our sense of ourselves, our physical sensations, uh, our interactions with other people, what seems to work, what seems to not work. There's so much that we're integrating and taking in. And while our neurons are connecting in our brains and our brains are developing, that to throw in powerful psychotropic medications during that time um, is particularly dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really important for the downside to be appreciated with that. Now, again, that doesn't mean that uh, it's all or nothing, and they should never ever be used. Period. With anyone that's not an adult, I don't have the expertise to say that, to make that claim, but I can see that there's a lot of potential downside. For example, with antidepressants, some of the research shows that it may double the risk of suicidality and aggression in kids and teens.
Mm.
Well, that's pretty serious.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that every child taking it will be suicidal, but it does mean that it increases the likelihood twice
Mm-hmm.
what it was.
In some, on average.
Yes. So my argument is that you have to take the side effects and the potential downside very seriously with these things. And there's another element to this is by adding these psychotropic medications to the mix, you also may be preventing the child from learning how to deal with their particular emotions, with their emotional internal experience.
Yeah.
For example, say, I was probably on the anxious side when I was little, and a lot of kids have some anxiety when they're little. So that's a time when you're with parents, hopefully that are loving and caring and are taking care of you and paying attention to you, probably more than you're going to find when you're, particularly when you're in your 20s.
Right.
And so it's a wonderful time to be able to be scared and figure out how to deal with being anxious and deal with, and anxiety isn't always being afraid. It can be just physical sensations. It can be a matter of CO2 levels. There's been research where people that have panic attacks, about 45 minutes before they feel anything, their CO2 levels have changed because they're basically holding their breath. They're breathing very shallowly. And so it's not that they're afraid of something, it's that they're not getting the right balance of CO2 and oxygen in their system. And that leads to the experience of the panic. So there's a lot of different things that can lead to these emotional, physical experiences. It's really important to learn how to master them yourself.
Yes, that's part of growing up. That's part of being a human. Anxiety has really been demonized, but it is a part of the human experience. It's a part of the living experience. Mother Nature is not a kind mistress.
And that's a really important point because anxiety has come to be seen as just a bad thing. And the truth is, it's not a bad thing. In as a very functional thing, it's your system saying, this matters, be ready. I play water polo. Every water polo game I've ever played in, I feel anxious before the game. Every one of them. And every one of my teammates I've talked to feel the same way. And when I've tried to calm myself so I'm not feeling that before a game, I don't play as well. Because part of what's happening is my system's getting revved up. And it also really matters to me how well I play.
Mm-hmm.
So that combination leads to an uncomfortable feeling of anxiety. But I understand now, after doing it for 45 years, how important that anxiety is to prepare myself. I feel anxious before giving a talk. I even felt a little anxious before our call here because my system's getting ready. This matters, be ready. So that's the very functional use of anxiety, and it's necessary. Now, anxiety can increase to the point where it interferes with being able to function, and that's another issue. But anxiety itself is just part of being human. I'm not an expert on the whole range of how this is used. Okay, so I want to be clear about that. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a teacher, so I'm not dealing with kids in the classroom every day. And so you're going to find, I'm sure, some instances somewhere where it's important that kids have some kind of help like this. And for certain kids, it's going to make a difference and it's going to be useful. I can't say that that's not true. What I can say is that these things are way over prescribed. And the main issue being that parents aren't being told the downside. They're not being told what you're trading. And that's my main point here, is if you're thinking about putting your kids on one of these psychotropic medications, make sure you know very clearly what the trade-offs are. It's not like taking a vitamin. It's not like taking an aspirin. These are powerful medications, and they affect our cognitive functioning, and they can have serious side effects.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not saying I know what's best for your kid, because there's no way I could know to any particular person listening what's best for your kid. I'm just saying, make sure that you take the time to look into what the potential hazards are and see if it's worth the trade-offs.
That's what it's all about, is harm reduction, right? And although you can't make a judgment call on any specific scenario, could you maybe use some of your expertise to shed light on where the line could lie when it comes to legitimate treatment and overuse? And here's how I'll set you up for that. Mm-hmm. At what point is dealing with the stressors and challenges of life, which helps you grow and strengthen as a human being, par for the course? And at which point do you butt up against that line to where it becomes detrimental to human flourishing? Yeah.
Well, I think in general, culturally today, that line is more towards, let's make things comfortable and let's not have adversity. If something's painful, let's get rid of it. That's the tendency culturally right now. Mm-hmm. That's what everybody is doing. It's more popular now to do that than it was than, say, when I was growing up.
True.
But there's a certain amount of adversity that we need in order to flourish. So there's a concept called anti-fragile. So, for example, if you don't get some kind of resistance in your bones from walking or running or jumping, your bones will become more brittle. They won't have the strength they need and the resilience they need to function properly. So without a certain amount of pounding, you actually get weaker. And that's true for anything. If life is too easy, if we don't have any challenges, we kind of we're not able to bring our best to things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the hard part is it's really nice to have things be easy, and we're drawn to things being easy. It's like who doesn't want to have millions of dollars in the bank and no worries and no need to do anything if you don't want to. And then the problem is what tends to happen when you don't need to do anything that you don't want to is you don't do anything.
Yeah.
And that's not universal or I mean, we also have a drive to do things and a curiosity and a need for a certain amount of adventure, and but it's very tempting. And so as we have more means to make life really, really easy, it's tempting to keep going in that direction. And the allure, I think, of let's say the medication for attention deficit disorder, Ritalin or Adderall. The allure is it makes the classroom calmer. There's this
Right.
kid that's kind of fidgety and moving around and maybe disrupting the class. If he's on that, if he's not disrupting the class, that's good for all the kids because the kids are there to learn. And so on the face of it, there's sort of a logic to it.
Yes.
The problem is what you're not seeing is the trade-offs. Now, let me give you an example of one piece of this. There's a very famous bunch of experiments, the marshmallow test. Walter Mischel from Stanford University did these back in the 60s. And he'd offer kids a marshmallow or a cookie. You got to choose whatever treat it was. There's like a little selection. And you're put in a room and you're a little kid, 4 or 5 years old, and you can have this cookie or this marshmallow, or you can wait till the experimenter comes back in the room in a little bit. And if you can wait, then you get 2. So you double your money, you double your treat. If you can just wait for 10, 15, 20 minutes. So some of the kids were able to wait. And it was painful, I'm sure, but they found ways of distracting themselves or thinking of something else. And they waited, and then they get a second marshmallow or a second cookie. There were other kids who didn't. They just started nibbling on it, and before you know it, magically it was gone.
Right.
And so they only got one. So as he followed up on these kids, and other experimenters followed up, they found that the kids that could hold out got better SAT scores, got better grades, were more successful when they got out of college and in their work. So the big takeaway was, God, I hope my kid's one of those that can delay gratification. But what's missing in all that is there was another piece to this study. They showed the kids a very simple thing that allowed these very young kids that weren't able to hold out before, now they're able to hold out. Now they're able to wait and get a second treat. That one simple thing was, they said, you don't have to see that as an actual marshmallow or a cookie. You can imagine a frame around it. So it's just a picture. And by making it abstract, by letting the kids know you have this option to just think of it in the abstract, those kids were able to hold out.
Wow.
And then they got the benefits of delaying gratification. They got a second cookie. So these are the kinds of things that kids can learn how to do. But if you throw some Ritalin in there before doing any of these things, then you miss out on that opportunity.
Opportunity for
So,
growth.
yeah. So that's one. Now, I'm not saying that that's always what happens, because there's probably a whole lot that parents and teachers are doing with these kids. So I'm not wanting to paint this with a real broad, overgeneralizing brush, but I'm just saying there's a lot that we can do to help kids to master their emotions and master their internal experiences and their impulses and their thoughts. And that's really the key to a flourishing life.
It
is
is
that sense of self-mastery.
It is, and I don't want to cut you off here, but those are the tools that you have spent decades developing and honing and teaching to people. So I think that's why when you see that this other alternative that's popped up with this medication, it's just that's not the long-lasting road to happiness. The way that it really, really lasts is you have to learn these tools and master these tools, like you said. And sometimes you might not ever make it there without a little help from medication. I mean,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? So obviously it's a tough balancing act, but one thing's for sure. The only way to have real, true, lasting happiness is to figure out these tools, medication or not, one way or another, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's really the key, because if you master your own experience, then you own it. Then it's yours for your whole life. And you're not at the mercy of whether, you have this particular, chemical or not. And like you said, and like I've said before, if that's the trade-off that's necessary, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I just want to make sure that people are aware of the trade-offs and are thinking about them and making a good, clear decision about that.
And never stop there, right? Your thing is you gotta constantly build this thing. This isn't take care of it by, popping something in the morning. This is an all day, everyday thing called living a happy and fulfilled life on planet Earth.
No, it's always a work in progress. Always, for our whole time on Earth.
Well, thank you so much, Joel, for letting us have this little peek into your personal life and the work that you do outside of the podcast. It's really interesting stuff, and we thank you for that glimpse.
Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, this is it's kind of tricky stuff, because we're all so different, and each one of us has our own experience and our own needs and our own world. And so what's right for one person is not going to be right for another. So I'm always very sensitive to, I'm not going to say, this is all bad or this is all good, because I frankly don't have that level of wisdom for every human being on Earth. I just want to make sure that as much as I can, that people are thinking about the whole range of the issue and making the choices that are right for them.
And keeping happiness and healthiness in mind as the end game, right?
Exactly.
Above all else.
Exactly, because it's the more you can own your own experience and master your own emotions and internal experience and direction and impulses, that's when you can create a life you're happy about and proud of. And you're not going to be happy and cheerful every moment of every day. That doesn't happen. But you can be happy about how you're living your life and have a flourishing life that you're making the best out of. And that, to me, is the project.
I love it. Absolutely love it. Everybody out there, thank you so much for listening. Continue to listen to the Mastering Happiness podcast. Share the show with a friend. Make sure you're subscribed. Give us a rating and review. We always appreciate that. Joel, thank you so much for all this wonderful work you do and helping enlighten the world one episode at a time.
Thank you, Jordan.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next time on the Mastering Happiness podcast.